a lot of times when you're thinking about this stuff, you think it's going to be a pain, like you're having to take medicine and all this, but it really wasn't at all. It's a few supplements and a glass of water that you drink every day. It's not like it's a huge investment of your time and energy, but the results you see are like 10 times worth 10 times the amount of energy you're putting into it.
Hey everyone, this is Dr. Ruscio. I am here today with Damien, who has had some very good results with changing his diet and using probiotics, amongst other things. And he was nice enough to take a moment to discuss his case with us. So Damien, thank you for taking a moment, and I'm excited to share your story.
Of course. Thank you for talking to me, and thank you for all your help.
Definitely. Can you give us kind of the short synopsis on what was going on before you and I first connected?
I think I had reached a point probably somewhere around a year ago where my digestive system had pretty much just completely and utterly collapsed. And I think it was due to a lot of factors, things like, most of my life, as a child, we lived in poverty, so we didn't eat the healthiest food. And then I ended up spending 20 years on death row for a crime that I didn't commit. And just the stress of that combined with the malnutrition, lack of sunlight, and then getting out here and excessive drinking to help deal with post-traumatic stress disorder. All of these things took a horrendous toll. Right. And I reached a point where, to be honest, I thought I was going to die. Like I thought that I had maybe a couple of months left to live at the most, because I felt so horrible and I could not maintain my body weight anymore because I had, constant severe diarrhea, dehydration, things like that. It was a pretty severe, and to be honest, just brutal condition that I was in. And I had tried everything else that I could possibly think of to try to fix it myself, reading about it, and nothing worked at all. And then a family member told us about you and the FODMAP work that you were doing. And we thought, let's give it a shot. And I'm very glad that we did.
And you get an A-star for trial, right? You had done gluten-free, you had done vegan, you had done low carb, you had done carnivore. You kind of went from each end of the dietary spectrum, and some flickers of improvement, but nothing that really moved the needle. You tried some enzymes, you tried some fiber supplementation, and that can be frustrating, right? When you try all these things and you're saying, well, I'm willing to put in the effort. I've tried diet XYZ, ABC. I've tried supplement 1, 2, 3, and still feeling like you're not gaining any traction. Can you maybe speak to that? Because I'm sure there are some people listening to or watching this who may identify with that.
Well, it was actually so bad and just so painful, and it seemed like it kept degrading, that I reached a point where I was willing to try pretty much whatever. It got so bad at one point that I was able to eat absolutely nothing but steamed white rice for a period of about 3 months. It was, even going through stuff like that, it was just absolutely horrendous. You reach a point where you don't even view food as pleasure anymore. You view it as, when all you can eat is rice every day, you're like, oh God, okay, I've got to eat again. And you shovel it down just to keep surviving. But it was an absolutely miserable condition. One thing about the FODMAP diet also that I realized, you were talking about how I tried all of these other treatments, all of these other things to try to help. One thing that really helped a great deal with the FODMAP diet was how it allows you to figure out what it is that's messing you up. Because I was doing stuff like eating as healthy as I possibly could, eating like baked salmon every meal and, lots of vegetables. And it just was not doing anything at all. If anything, it was getting worse. And it was after doing the FODMAP diet that I was able to absolutely identify and pinpoint the foods and the lifestyle stuff and everything else that was causing such damage.
That's the pernicious thing about the FODMAP containing foods, is there are almost all foods that are synonymous with healthy eating. Broccoli, cauliflower, asparagus. Like, who would ever have thought that those foods would be bad to eat? And you'll see people like yourself who really care about their health, and they're trying, yet they're feeling worse despite trying more. And not in every case, but in many a case, the low FODMAP can be very helpful. And we had used the vegetarian low FODMAP because the vegetarian template was one that you wanted to adhere to. And
right.
I think this is also important for people to keep in mind, because sometimes you see online like a paleo plus low FODMAP, and you might think, well, does the low FODMAP mean I have to eat meat? No, it's really the carbohydrates that have to be restricted. Sometimes you get a combination of paleo plus low FODMAP. We've dissected them out to vegetarian low FODMAP, standard or unmodified low FODMAP, and also paleo low FODMAP, so as to give people this range of diets. And that was one big step forward for you. And the diarrhea was improving. And there was also some nerve pain, probably partially from the alcohol drinking historically, but that combined with a gut that's leaky and leading to all this diarrhea, it's going to make it really hard for your intestines to glom onto and absorb those B vitamins to help with some of that nerve pain. And by the way, if this has been helpful, please comment and subscribe. This really does help us reach more people who are trying to improve their health. So it is quite deeply appreciated.
Absolutely. I mean, so much of it slips my mind. Once you start improving, like you quickly forget how bad the worst parts of it were. I think it's kind of like whenever they talk about women giving birth, like how horrendous the pain is, and afterwards they forget at least a little bit of it. Right. So I'd even started to kind of forget a little bit, like things like the nerve pain. But you're right, I had reached a point where I almost could not walk anymore. I would have these like really fierce shooting pains like lightning through my feet whenever I would step wrong. Yep. And the first thing I thought was, I wonder if it's diabetes, because you always hear about people, getting pain in their hands and feet with diabetes.
Sure.
And like I said, I was doing everything I could. The foods you were just talking about, like broccoli and Brussels sprouts and cauliflower, I was eating those things every day. I had completely eliminated sugar from my diet.
Yeah, you were on a diabetes diet for sure.
Exactly. I was eating Brussels sprouts every morning for breakfast, cauliflower, just trying to pack as many vegetables in as I could. And I thought, I can't eat any better than I'm eating. What am I supposed to do? And it just was not working.
Yeah. And that's the paradox for some people who need to reduce their FODMAPs, which is why we really try to champion that. And the AGA recently was quoted, the American Gastroenterology Association, as saying that for IBS, and you didn't quite have IBS, but you had a similar enough presentation, is the most evidence-based or scientifically informed diet for IBS. So that's really important for people to know, because there's still people out there who are, just like you said, having all these vegetables, packing them in, but still not feeling well. So we have a big check for the dietary piece. The other thing that really seemed to gel nicely with that was the probiotics and the gut rebuild nutrients. And there was actually recently a study that looked at one large group of people. Half of them got low FODMAP, the other half got low FODMAP plus probiotics. And you would guess the result of the study was they both improved, but a significantly better outcome was demonstrated in those using both the diet plus the probiotics, which is exactly what we had done with you. So can you speak at all to how the probiotics felt?
Well, it wasn't, a lot of times when you're thinking about this stuff, you think it's going to be a pain, like you're having to take medicine and all this, but it really wasn't at all. It's a few supplements and a glass of water that you drink every day. It's not like it's a huge investment of your time and energy, but the results you see are like 10 times the amount of energy you're putting into it. Sure. I mean, you're doing very little work, just taking something, and you're able to tell with I wouldn't say every single day, but I would say within, the differences that I was noticed in my health improving. It wasn't quite every day, but I would look back over a period of like a week and realize in that week how far I had come, that I had some definite changes in that 1 week. And the probiotics were a huge part of that.
And that's a key thing that you said. I'm so glad that you raised that point, which is many of the therapies in kind of integrative gut care don't function like an Advil for a headache, meaning, right, you take it and then 20 minutes later you feel something. And it is important to look at these things on more of a macro level, a week or a 2 week look back, and then ask, Am I better? Yes or no? Not am I perfect? Have I had no ups and downs? But if it's like a stock ticker, we should be looking at this sort of trajectory over a few weeks.
Yes. And that's exactly what it was like. It's like you notice it. It may not be like glaringly apparent that you're healing while you're going through it, but when you look back in hindsight over just very short periods of time, you can tell, oh yeah, I have come a long way.
Yes, and you have, and in a short time, right? And you're a nice case in the sense that a lot of this hit within a month, and maybe we should just acknowledge that that's not the road for everyone. People might experience the same level of improvement you did in 3 months rather than one. But the thing we want to look for is, are we trending in the right direction? And if so, let's ride that wave as far as we can.
Exactly. Exactly. And you can always go back to it. If you start to slip a little bit for a while, you go through one course of it and you start to, all those foods start to creep into your diet again that caused harm in the first place, but it just happens with life. You can go back on the diet from time to time and eliminate, clean it out, and kind of hit the reset button again.
Exactly.
There are a ton of studies showing that probiotics can clear SIBO and can clear other infections. Whereas there's only 2 studies to date showing that antimicrobial therapy can clear SIBO. And we're about to publish actually the 3rd in existence. And maybe I'll just pause there and let you comment, because I don't know that enough healthcare providers and certainly enough lay people understand that there are over 22 studies showing that probiotics can clear SIBO. And there's only 2 showing that antimicrobials can clear SIBO. I don't think that that's the impression that you were under, at least before we had chatted, right?
That's right. Yeah. And if I can just say, so before, when my symptoms were at their worst, I was just doing some self-discovery. And in the spirit of being healthy and, trying to live forever, I was eating all the fermented foods and taking all the probiotics, et cetera. And that was making my symptoms, much more worse. And so then when I started going down the path of SIBO, all of the functional doctors, the books and podcasts I could find on it, and I really dove into it, it was really just the conventional wisdom was to use antimicrobials. And I did rifaximin and I felt okay for most of it. And then at the end, symptoms kind of came back on. I did all the antimicrobials. But to your point, the thing that was fascinating is I then sat in that sort of antimicrobial world, being terrified of all probiotics, except for maybe a soil-based one, and for like 3 years.
Right.
So yeah, it wasn't like 2 months of searching and then.
Yeah, and this is where it can be hard to read because fermented foods do contain probiotics, but they're also, as I know with the whole histamine backstory, are high in histamine. And so it could be easy to sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater and say fermented foods don't sit well with you. Oh, it's got to be because of the probiotics.
Right.
Usually as we heal someone's gut, they're more able to tolerate histamine, whether it be just histamine foods natively, like let's say avocado or spinach, or histamine containing foods that are fermented. But the key point is that we want to be careful not to forego such an effective therapy, probiotics, if there is SIBO.
I was doing breath tests for SIBO, and my numbers, as my symptoms went down, my numbers stayed the same or went up. So it actually got to the point where I was like, well, I don't even care about these tests because they're sort of all over the place, and at least I'm feeling better. Which,
welcome to my camp.
Point, sort of, exactly. Right. And I have 2 close friends. I joke, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's an epidemic. But I have 2 close friends who, like myself, had bizarre symptoms for a few years and ended up getting diagnosed one way or another with, what everybody's calling SIBO here. And they are like myself in that they've been treating off and on for a year or 2 now, and still, if they're off the herbs for too long or eat high FODMAPs, their symptoms come back. And so, of course, I'm preaching to them now, oh my gosh, you've got to try this probiotic methodology.
So you're on 2 types of probiotic, the seed being a lactobacillus and bifidobacterium blend, and the soil-based being a soil-based probiotic. I believe your dosage was a little bit on the low side. How many capsules of each were you doing per day? Was it 2?
That's a good question.
Do you recall?
I was taking 2 of the seed and I think 1 soil.
Yeah. Okay. So that's not a bad, entry point dose, but the way we break this down is, so picture you have these 3 different formulas. You have the lactobif, which would be seed. You have the soil-based, and then what you weren't on was a Saccharomyces boulardii, or Boulardii, which is a fungus. So you're on 2, 1, and 0, essentially. And our minimal dose is 2, 2, and 2.
Right.
And I believe we started you on the sticks, which essentially takes 2 capsules from each into a single serving tear stick. And we gave you the recommendation of taking those once or twice per day. So that'd be 2, 2, and 2 once per day. Or if you were doing twice per day, it'd be 2, 2, and 2 twice per day. So the dosage is significantly higher. It's what's been used in the clinical research, but how it differs is this whole theory of triple therapy, which hasn't yet been published. And it's something that we are working on publishing. Hopefully at some point next year, we'll be able to publish this in some sort of, control to intervention setup. But we know that with many different imbalances or infections, more than one, either antimicrobial or antibiotic, works better than one alone. And so that's kind of the same thing that we're doing here. You were on 2 different formulas. One, you're on a really low dose. We got you on 3 formulas at a bit more of a clinically viable dose. And look at the change that you saw. It was just, really nice exemplification of how powerful this can be.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And it was almost instant for me, a few days. So it's not like, weeks and weeks in, which was incredible. As I was on them, it only took about a week for me to notice, oh my gosh, I don't really have any symptoms. And then when you and I spoke a week or so ago, we were 6 weeks in, like you said, and I think I used the language, like, this is the most normal I've felt in 5-6 years, like a normal human being. And if I can just say, I mentioned this when we jumped on this morning, I was eating low FODMAP. And so as you and I caught up a week or 2 ago, you're like, hey, enjoy some FODMAPs. So I spent a week this past week with my wife out in Zion hiking, and I ate all the FODMAPs you could eat. And in the past, I would have been chugging herbs and still feeling 20%, if you will, of symptoms. And it's still like I'm a normal human again. So
yes,
it's pretty amazing.
That to me is the most important thing, is that you feel normal, because as someone who's felt abnormal or sick, whatever phrasing we want to use, it's pernicious. Psychologically, it's pernicious, meaning you can't enjoy life because you're thinking about, is there FODMAP in this? Is there nightshade in that? Is there gluten in this? And it's not, that's not how one should have to live if we're doing all these things correctly. And I really believe that the mindset mentality piece is at least 20%. For some people, it might be as much as 40, 50%. Like literally in some cases, it can be half the game, because even when they are feeling better, there's still this sort of malware of fear in the background running all the time. And we know that fear correlates with the reactivity of your immune system, meaning it turns it up. So yeah, just the fact that you said you're feeling normal is such a huge win.
So can you just share with the audience sort of what your symptoms were when you came in to see me?
Yeah, I felt very generally overall just very off. My hormones were definitely all over the place. I would bloat anytime I ate. My skin was just full of acne. My hair was thinning, and just lack of energy and just big mood swings. I definitely knew that that's not what my body should be doing. I definitely knew like that wasn't as good as it could get.
Right. And what was the most, I guess, troublesome symptoms for you, and how are they impacting, your daily life?
Yeah. So, hormones are different for everybody, but how it affected me to where every month I kind of felt like I had the flu, and to where the lack of motivation and trying to get on with life when you are kind of feeling that way is hard. And then also just the lack of confidence you get when you don't feel like you are in your true best self or your best fashion. those were the major ones. It's just the overall, how I felt about myself definitely wasn't what it should be. And then how I felt or what my body was doing was kind of causing that too. But
Right.
I think most of it was my internal feelings for myself. And then in return, knowing what I wanted for myself, I knew that I had to fix those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the way you feel about yourself is so important, and our health definitely affects that. And I know some of your main symptoms, like the bloating. You've had migraines for years, since 2003 is what I have in my notes. The acne, the heavy periods, the fatigue, all of that. And so my initial thoughts there, and also diagnosed the PCOS. And just one of the things that stood out to me was just the gut health symptoms. It's just significant bloating. You feel like you're always bloated. Whenever you ate something, you just felt like you, quote unquote, blew up in the stomach. And that to me really signified just imbalances in the gut bacteria. And I remember even sending you like a message just about, how the gut can affect PCOS. And there's been a correlation there. And so as opposed to just going right into treating your hormones, we really focus on the gut. And what was your, what experience did you have previously with working with other people in terms of treating that? Like, what was that experience like for you?
Yeah. So like you said about the headaches, I even forget to mention it because I had have them all my life, that you don't really realize that they're not supposed to be there. But initially for the treatment, I've tried different things with hormones. I've tried medications. I've gone to a whole bunch of other doctors, and I knew that a whole bunch of supplements and a whole bunch of extra things are not what I work best with. I'm not a very great scheduled person. I'm a little more sporadic. So I like the idea of approaching it and just kind of focusing on one part of my body and not trying to fix all the symptoms at once, and just trying to focus on one core area that we can really like hone in on.
Yeah. And that was the kind of the initial plan here. It was really, we just focused on nutrition. We put you on a low FODMAP diet to really help calm down the inflammation and the dysbiosis in the gut. And I was reading through my notes, and it was framed in a way that was like, it's just going to be a month trial. Like, let's just see how this goes, as opposed to saying, this is the diet you must stick with. This is kind of a forever thing. It wasn't as rigid. It was more, let's just see how it goes for a month, and then after that, we'll talk. So we did that. We did triple therapy probiotics and inositol and spearmint tea. So the inositol and the spearmint tea were more for helping to lower testosterone, which you had said had been high for a long time in the past, and it was high on the initial labs that we did. So after we met next, so you've been on the diet, probiotics, inositol, and spearmint tea, and then and I have my notes here, so I know it's easy to forget, but do you recall how things were after that first visit?
Yeah, so definitely. So when we first started doing the food, I think it was easier to kind of stick with that plan because it wasn't adding anything new. It was just using what I already had, because like we have to eat. So if I just treated it as new ingredients, so I had to use the probiotics, I just treated them like a new ingredient. I didn't think about it as a supplement. It was just something to add to what I'm already eating. And then even just that first, I would say within the first 3 to 4 weeks, I felt incredibly clear, if that makes sense. Like it was almost like a fog was lifted, and also just like generally like I felt like I could breathe easier, like I wasn't so bloated about things. It was just, my body felt a little more at ease with everything.
Awesome. Yeah, and I also have here that you lost about 15 pounds, which we weren't, there's no calorie counting or anything. It was just, focusing on clean, real food. And everything basically improved except for the heavy periods. That was the one thing that didn't budge. And so, like I said at the initial visit, we're not going to tackle everything at once. Let's just see what happens with this initial plan here: the probiotics, the diet, and then the inositol and the spearmint. Heavy periods didn't clear up, so we ended up adding in a herb called Vitex, which helps to offset that, helps raise progesterone, which can help with that heavy period. And then we also brought in some more protein into your diet, because I suspected you were on the lower side there. We had some nice protein shakes, which you now enjoy, and coffee. We did repeat blood work, and your testosterone was normal. Your DHEA was normal. And just that's, from what I understood, it's really never been normal for you. And so what's really funny is that the probiotics and then the inositol had been stopped for about 2 months. And when we had done the blood draw. So really it may have been the spearmint tea. It may have just been your, lifestyle change, but just anything you want to share about the lab change. And just to preface that, lab changes are definitely not everything. It's what I care more about is how you're feeling. So anything you want to share regarding your thoughts there?
Yeah, because like I said, I went to a slew of doctors before this, and I kind of lost hope because the labs were always funky, and it would never be so off that it would raise so many red flags, but it was always off enough that I knew that it was off. And so to have normal ones for the first time was, again, incredibly exciting. And I think like you said too, and like what I've said, like giant problems don't have to have giant solutions. And I felt like I was just this one giant problem and I had all these things going on. So it was going to be a big giant solution. But realizing just like your body's domino effect and just like celebrate the small wins because it's going to continue to domino the opposite direction. I think that was the biggest for me, was that excitement of knowing that there are still few that could get better. Like my iron could get better, but it's still dominoing. So I just have to keep doing it and it'll continue to do better as long as I continue to give my body what it needs.
Hey everyone, today I had an amazing conversation with Cordila and her story from being nearly bedbound due to mold exposure to now being pretty much a normal, functional person, feeling much, much better.
I moved into an apartment in which the mold existed that I did not know. And that kicked off a whole nother chapter. It was a ground floor apartment and it just was really sort of seeped in this musty smell. It came to be that we found water was leaking out from the walls. The ceiling ended up cracking. Like as I got there, mold just started expressing itself all over. But that's a big, long story for another time. But I was surrounded by mold. And when I ended up coming out of the apartment, I'll just say this one thing. When I ended up coming out of the apartment, was coughing so hard I couldn't catch my breath. And I called the doctor. They had this, this was also part of the Religious Sisters of Mercy. They connected me to this doctor who was interested in medevacing me from Rome. And I called him and I couldn't catch my breath. And he said, Cordila, you have one of two options. Either you leave that house effective immediately, or you come into my office and I will give you a steroid injection in your neck because I'm worried you're going to stop breathing.
Ooh. That's
where I was. And I left the apartment.
So a pretty severe crash, obviously, and kind of a perfect storm leading up to that. To snapshot your symptoms for people, and let me know if I've missed anything here. But what I have, at least from your initial paperwork, we ask on a scale of 0 to 100, how do you rate yourself? You had rated 25, which obviously is not good, with fatigue, post-exertional fatigue, brain fog, weight gain, watery eyes, edema, food sensitivities, bloating, nausea, and LPR. Is that a fair encapsulation? Anything that you'd want to add? I mean, I'm sure there's many symptoms, but what would you add to that, if anything?
I don't think I'd add anything to it, Dr. Ruscio, but I think I'd give a little bit more specific so people can get a good visual about what that means.
Please,
I had 20 pounds, what felt like overnight. And I gained it in really interesting areas. And I think it also foreshadowed something about what the actual treatment pathway was that maybe we weren't aware of at the time. But I gained it like in my chest, which is a really weird place to gain. I mean, I gained it kind of all over, but it was really also like in hormonal regions, let's say, kind of belly, chest. And I just thought, I mean, I'm 50. I thought, hey, listen, this is what happens. It just happened to happen to me over Rome, but this is kind of what happens. The other thing that happened that I think was really indicative of what was going on with me internally is I went over there with hair this long and I came back with hair this long. My hair stopped growing.
Right.
It's as if my whole body needed that energy for something else. And so all these functions that your body does without you ever thinking about it just ceased to function in me. And it wasn't until later that I noticed some of those things. But that's where I was, 20 pounds heavier and stagnant hair.
Yeah. And it seemed like your body was really in this sort of fight or flight stress response. And everything other than critical functions were shutting down or being minimized, which you'll see in a health crisis like this.
Yeah.
So that brings you in, right? And now the question is, what do we do to get you out of here? And this is where things get interesting because, as you know, we try to strike this balance of being open-minded on the one hand, but also looking for the BS in the field, not drinking the Kool-Aid on the other. So mold testing was part of what we did, and we'll share your results here. But essentially, every mycotoxin, which I don't even like that word, every mold metabolite, little less scary of a term, every mold metabolite from your urine test came back elevated.
Yeah.
So this could lead someone to go down a certain path of, treating, especially if you follow this sort of Richie Shoemaker camp. You would want to treat all these inflammatory pathways very specifically, and it's a very sort of laborious care plan. And this is not the path that we took. And I think we may have discussed this, or maybe you came across this in listening to some of our podcasts, but there's kind of a division in the mold treatment community. There's two sort of major camps. And sorry for all the nerdy clinical context, but just to give people this background, there's the Richie Shoemaker, which I find to be very, very sort of superfluous, lots of details, lots of treatment of the lab markers. And then there's more of this Neil Nathan, a bit more practical, and kind of the approach that we've been resonating more with. So that's the approach that we take, is let's look at the big practical rocks. But even within the Neil Nathan camp, there's a couple things that we've been questioning, which one is, what sort of correlation do we see between someone's symptoms and what comes back on these urine metabolites? Yeah. And we're just recently coming to this conclusion that there's not a lot of correlation between the two. And we say this after a number of cases where we've tracked them over time, yours being one, and we're not seeing the retests correlate with their symptoms. Right. And or we're not seeing binding or binder therapy be very helpful. And my suspicion on this was initially roused when I interviewed Neil Nathan a few years back. And you get this sort of, well, it can take 6 months or even longer for the binders to have impact. Sometimes it's a year. And yeah, there could be a time and place where that is true. But usually, being someone who's done this sort of healthcare for 10 years, when you hear that sort of response, that usually means the person doesn't have a good enough handle on what's happening. Because if it is the right sort of therapy, usually by a month, you're going to see the needle move. Not move from 25% to 100, but you're going to have a significant and consistent clinical signal that, yes, we're doing the right thing. When someone tells me 6 months until you see benefit, I have an extremely hard time swallowing that. Your case is a very good example wherein binders didn't do anything. Really, we didn't have to do any binding therapy. Environment was key. Gut support like probiotics were key. Gupta seemed to be key. Protein intake and movement seemed to be key. But the binders, ironically, didn't really seem to be a big factor. People will get hit with what you described, sort of like burn the house down and move, which, okay, you have to do that, fine. But not everyone has to do that. And so if our blanket recommendation is everyone burns their house down, then we're going to be way over treating some people. In your case, for whatever reasons, maybe it's immune system, maybe it's your background of TBI, maybe it's a combination of the two, maybe it's the type of mold in the environment that got into the books, got into the clothes. You were quite sensitive to those things like clothing and books, but not everyone's going to be. So for the people that aren't, we don't want to have them burn all their stuff, effectively, or throw it out. And this is where the phased approach comes in. And even in your case, there was a nice improvement. Yeah. And you had this newer baseline against which you could then say, ooh, I forget exactly what you did, but I think you went in and you looked at some of the books and like immediate regression. In fact, Joe Mather from our office had noticed that same thing with some of the books that were in his moldy environment. So you will see this, but the key thing to also tie to is it'll be fairly obvious. Like there wasn't this, well, the books might be a problem, I'm not really sure. And I think it's important that people understand the same thing with, can I eat XYZ food? It's not going to be this ethereal thing where I had gluten on a Tuesday and the following Friday I have 2 hours of brain fog. It should be pretty obvious. And that's important because if not, you can drive yourself crazy calling or drawing associations to things that may not actually be there.
Yeah. I think there were a couple things I'm so loving this conversation. I think there are a couple things that you just brought up that reminded me of what we did and what we didn't do. So one of the things that we did do is I did change my coffee. I did research mold-free coffee. I found Peak Performance has this great mold-free coffee. I did start drinking that, and it did so to the food question, did make an impact when I started drinking mold-free coffee in regard to the cough. Of course, it didn't do anything for the watery eyes or the weight gain, none of that, but it did really impact the cough. The second thing, and I think this is so critical, for those achievers out there, as the Gupta program would call them, I put myself in that camp. For those of us who are achievers, when we learn, okay, mold might be an issue, like I'm just going to go throw myself at the issue and research my way into it and figure out what I can do to help me help myself.
Right.
And so I had researched like infrared sauna therapy, and I thought, okay, this is great. And I found one right here because at this point, I'm still not leaving the house. I'm still not doing anything. And it was just like a stone's throw from the front door. So I went there. I did a session at the lowest intensity for the shortest amount of time. I did 5 minutes, and I did it once in January and once in February. And the one time I did it in January, it left me bedbound for a month. And I did it again in February, not knowing what it was that caused the bedbound circumstance. I did it again in February, and immediately it left me bedbound for a month again. And you and I talked about it, and you said that there are some people who have sensitivity to infrared sauna, and that you are one of them as well. And so you and I kind of shared that, and we said, okay, let's stop that. What came up out of that, though, is a conversation that continued to lead us to where we ended up. But what came out of that, I said, hey, listen, I think we need to drain stuff. We've got the detox, the binders and all that kind of thing. And I had started with some of the binders, and I was having really negative reactions. And what we realized was there's the detox process, and you can bind something, but if you don't get it out of your body, it just is running around in your system again. And now it's a free agent active. And so I think for me, I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't eliminating, my skin wasn't breathing. I mean, back to what you said, all of my not necessary systems had basically shut down. And so I wasn't digesting, I wasn't moving toxins out of my system. So what you and I did at that time, phase 1 was really get everything out of the environment. Phase 2 was open up the drainage pathways. I started taking Epsom salt baths. I started dry skin brushing. I started, taking magnesium citrate as a supplement to make sure things were moving south of the border. I, started working really actively on sleep and making sure I was getting enough sleep. So all of those things were really helping my body do, and this is what I love about you, Dr. Ruscio, is the body knows what it needs to do. Right. And it's equipped to do the thing. And in Rome, it was protecting me from, a lot of things that were happening in the environment, which was important. And we'll get into that in a minute, but it was actually actively protecting me in the fight or flight. And then with the mold situation, my body was trying to get it out, and I just couldn't get it out. By opening up these pathways, we were assisting my body in doing what it does naturally. And the thing that shifted it for me, we got the books out of the environment around the same time we started what turned out to be the unlock for me, which was the HPA Select. I think and this is so important that I share this with people, because, back to this idea that people are you're a holistic vessel. I had no capacity I explained it to friends and family as follows. I have nothing to give. I am not depressed. I'm obviously disappointed about what happened, but I'm not depressed. But I have nothing in the tank. There is no gas. There is not one drop of gasoline in the tank. So to put that in context, I did not participate in Thanksgiving. I did not participate in Christmas. I did not participate. I literally sequestered myself, because even the act of having a conversation that you and I are having now, I was not able to conduct this type of conversation, even up to March, April of this year. Right. I had no ability to communicate, to socialize, to give anything out of myself. There was nothing to give, nothing. And so when you and I had that conversation, and I think we talked about that, I said, Dr. Ruscio, there's nothing. I have nothing. And I don't know I'd be interested to hear from you what it was that turned you on to the idea that we needed to support my adrenals and my mitochondria. That was the thing that flipped the switch from one day to the next. It literally, I started the HPA Select. And when I started getting support in the area of my fight or flight mechanism that had been so drained of all of its vital capacity, that's when things turned around for me. So where the mold plays in, I'm not sure.
And we also had you optimize your protein intake at the same time. Do you feel that the protein was also helpful?
Yeah.
Muscle is an endocrine organ, and muscle will release these myokines, which are actually immunomodulatory and anti-inflammatory. And for some people who've had this chronic stress response, chronic inflammation from mold or from other things, it can deplete their anabolic responses, because we do know that there are certain upstream pathways of amino acid metabolism that can make amino acids go down pathways to create inflammatory cytokines, which are protein derived, or fuel muscle mass, muscle recovery, tissue repair, all these anabolic processes. And especially in this cohort that's had a chronic health ailment, this is where really optimizing protein intake can be quite important. In fact, Jeff Moss over at Moss Nutrition has been writing about this for, I think, 5+ years. And there's a lot of data in burn injury recovery and how they also need more protein to fuel tissue repair and tissue recovery. So on the one hand, the upping of the protein, I think, allowed your body to heal, repair, probably to some extent get some muscle mass back. And then that has a spillover effect with all these myokines that modulate inflammation. And then in tandem with that, the adrenal support, I think, was doing two things simultaneously. One, you probably needed some HPA access support to help regulate the production of cortisol, but also licorice in helping to extend the half-life of cortisol. I think for people in your situation, they may need a little bit more baseline cortisol. And again, because licorice helps prolong the half-life of cortisol or prevent the degradation of cortisol, I think that helped get you from this sort of hypoadrenal state into a more normative state. And together, this was the one visit where I was just the most excited to see, like, you really came back online. And it was probably a culmination of some of the groundwork we had laid prior to that. But the protein plus the correct adrenal support really seemed to be, like you said, a big unlock for you.
Whenever I have a health setback, it is so emotionally devastating. And it is so easy to fall into this, forget it, fine, whatever. I'm not going to try anymore. I'm over it. I can't do it. The Herculean effort that's required on an emotional level to get yourself back on your feet cannot be underestimated and understated. And I think anyone who's listening to your podcast, who's had a journey like mine, or even a shorter truncated journey of health, I just want to say hats off to anyone who every day wakes up and says, you know what, I'm going to give it another shot. I may have slipped back. I may have fallen into a ditch. I did something, with Dr. Ruscia, we tried something and sometimes it didn't work. We tried binders and I tried infrared sauna. I went rogue and I did infrared sauna on my own and it sapped me, but it's not an option to stop. And if I could just say that to people that, you have a team, you can put a team around you. And that's the other thing that I would just say is, like, I worked really hard to find you. You are not easy. Like, when I say not easy to find, I mean, there are so many options out there and all of it, I know the pain, all of it costs money. These kinds of interactions that we have, they're not without a financial cost and a financial burden to people. And so everyone, I suspect, is like me, where you want to spend your money wisely. You want to be a judicious steward of the resources that you have, because especially when health has been such a marked impact in your life, you are drained of resources. I lost so much money. I took a job and I doubled down. I lost twice as much as I'd earned. Twice. That isn't like that well has a bottom. And I think for the people who are on this journey, again, don't stop, look for people.
This is truly at the core of what we do. I absolutely love helping people improve their health in a one-on-one clinical setting. As someone who suffered a decent amount throughout my life with gut issues, I'm so passionate about helping you guys improve. So if this seems like a lot and you need some guidance, please reach out. Would be more than happy and honored to help you. Again, this really is at the center of what we do. And really, all of this is built upon in part my own suffering, and then wanting to help alleviate that suffering of other people. So if you need help, reach out to the clinic and we will be more than happy to help.